Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the 16th seminar in our series, Horizon 2055. Remember, we're asking about roughly how art can help us imagine the future. And I'm really excited to introduce today's speaker, Jonathan van der Walt. Jonathan is a local visual artist and a sculptor with 2 solo exhibitions and numerous group showings to his name. He holds a master's in sculpture from Nelson Mandela University, where he's now serving his sentence as teacher and postgrad supervisor and curator of the university's Bird Street Gallery and overseer of the 3D printing lab. I'm mocking him a bit because every time I invite him to the chair's more entertaining engagements, he's too bogged down with responsibilities to join. So we're pretty lucky to have him here now with us. Jonathan will be presenting on the artist in the machine age. And if I read him right, he's inviting us to dance our way into the world of contemporary sculpture and digital craftsmanship. Of course, my imagination goes wild and has us waltzing over the moon with kind of futuristic androids. But I suspect Jonathan's going to pull us back down to earth. And he's going to draw from his recent residency at the William Humphreys Art Gallery and a solo exhibition that emerged from that. And he's going to speak about the practicalities, I think, of art's future in relation to entrepreneurship. And he's going to make a case for technologies like 3D scanning and 3D digital modeling and simulation construction and 3D printing as kind of empowering tools for art entrepreneurs of the future. So a warm welcome, Jonathan, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Wow, what a lovely intro. I'm glad I could make this engagement.
Me too.
And yeah, good afternoon, everyone, in the meeting or in the seminar. I'm going to try my best to share my screen swiftly. I was saying to Andrea that I hadn't quite timed myself, so I'm going to do a test timing live, and hopefully all goes well. I think I am sharing the correct screen.
Yes, looks good.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much. This, as Andrea said, I'm going to be reflecting on my recent residency, which was last year at the William Humphreys Art Gallery. And I'm going to speak to how I worked in that space, how it changed my way of thinking, how it brought out certain aspects of the way I make and challenged certain ways in which I make. And it's primarily a practice-based investigation. So I know the question of how art might change or help us in the future is a grand task to take on. But what I hope to do is just reflect on this residency, on how I work, how I changed the way I work, and then maybe from that some questions come, which is the great philosophical route. But it's also quite interesting for me, or significant, because I haven't really reflected on this residency in this sort of format or in this way up until this point, outside of maybe the exhibition walkabouts. So it's quite nice to go back and to think about what I was thinking about at those points. And now a year and a half ago already, which is crazy. So I've split it up into 3 sections: the why, the what, the how. I want to just give a bit more context for those that don't know on the residency and the exhibition that were held in 2024, and then the themes and the concepts I was dealing with. And then more importantly, within, I think, this discussion is the ways in which I made the work. So on to the why. So I was awarded this residency in January of 2024 from a national call. I put forward an application and a proposal, and I think they were going to notify us in the first week of January, and it was the end of January and I hadn't heard anything. So I thought, okay, I'll put that behind. It's another thank you for your submission, but and then it was at a staff meeting at the end of January that I suddenly got notified that I was accepted and can I be there in 2 weeks, which was hugely daunting and a logistical nightmare to try, because it was also, can you be there in 2 weeks for 7 weeks? Which is quite a task to do at the start of the year. So I'm very grateful and thankful to the Department of Visual Arts for supporting me in taking on this venture. And yeah, I went across in early Feb. I think it was about the 11th of Feb. And then I was absolutely, astounded by the museum. The museum itself, it's a huge collection. I'm not sure if any of you have attended or have gone to the WAG, as they call it, but it had a huge collection of rock art, various contemporary works, modernist works from South African artists, and a lot of showing from Eastern Cape, which was quite nice to see. I can't recall exactly, but I think a director through their history was Eastern Cape based and helped everyone up. But it had a studio space, as you can see here, which was a very frightening printmaking looking studio. So as a sculptor, it was very clean, and there's a tendency for sculptors to have a messy workspace. So there was that first sort of meeting, but at the same time, it was an extra weight on the shoulders because you had to produce a solo show at the end of the 7 weeks residency. I think it was actually 6 weeks. The 7th week was the exhibition happening. So that was very frightening, and I had to get stuck in quite early. But on a side note, one of the first things, well, I noticed it a bit later on in the residency. It was on the wall in the studio, but I started to see some very familiar names, such as Jessica Staple, who is in the seminar, as well as Vulindlela Nyoni, our previous HOD, and Stephanie Conradi was a Standard Bank Young Artist for 2024 nationally. There were previous, as you can see, 2014, 2015 printmaking workshops that happened in that space. The other significant aspect about the residency is that I was actually born in Kimberley. So it was returning to my birthplace. And for most of my life there, I lived on Athens Street in the suburb earlier. It was my first time going back there after 20 years. And you'll see in the thematics of the work I was making, it was very significant to actually go back in time like this and look at my identity. But another interesting thing about this, bringing up Stephanie Conradi on the previous slide, is I was chatting to her prior to this residency, saying I'm going on the residency to Kimberley, and she said, oh, wow, I lived in Kimberley for a long period of time. So I was like, okay. I was born there, I lived there, and then I said the years I was there, and she said, oh, I was there too. And I said, what school did you go to? Same primary school as me. I think we were a year apart. At the same time, a year apart, and turns out she lived on Athens Street, about 2 houses away from me, and we just never crossed paths. I did some of the touristy things just to get some context of the space. You can see there, I was in close proximity. I was the red arrow. It's my accommodation, so I was very close to the gallery, to work on my project. I arrived on the 11th, and the 15th was the 104th anniversary of the relief after the siege of Kimberley, which ended on 15th February 1900. So I was invited to attend a very fascinating talk at the beautiful Afrikaner Library, which was a nice way to get settled in. So yeah, as I said, this was the first exhibition at William Humphreys. It also involved a couple of talks with local kids, local art community on my practice. They got to come into the studio and see and feel the work, and I got to speak about the process behind it. And then it ended in the exhibition opening, which ran for 2 months or so. I was then very fortunate to be able to show it back here in Gqeberha at the GFI Art Gallery. Anna and Rose were excited and supported the showing here, which was great for me because it gave me a couple of months to sit on the work I had made and think of new work to add to it. And it had a totally different energy and feel in the space. It was a lot lighter and brighter than the room I had at the William Humphreys. And each work seemed to have a different sort of energy about it. Again, I did talks and demonstrations about 3D printing, 3D modeling, and how I utilized that, which I'll get into now. And then I was very honored that this specific exhibition was awarded as a shortlist finalist for the National Institute of Humanities and Social Sciences under the Creative Collections Best Emerging Artist category, which was a great recognition. Now, the what. What did I actually make? So this is a, oh, sorry, I think that's me. This is a look at a snippet of my camera roll, what you would see if you looked at my phone. And you'd think I'm just love to braai, which is part of the concept, but ultimately it came from a space, it had been brewing for many years, this idea. It was a very personal one, and normally the work I did was actually very distant and not personal in any capacity. So it, for me, became the space where I was looking at this braai, and it stemmed from Heritage Day. It stemmed from what does that mean to me, and what does culture mean to me, and it came from many years of not realizing that I didn't know quite how to present my culture or how to dress, how to celebrate. There weren't any markers, there weren't any sort of clothing, symbolic clothing that I could wear that I felt, I didn't have any European connection. I was born in South Africa, as many generations before me in my family. And it became this questioning space. And then obviously Heritage Day naturally had this association with National Braai Day, which became this media gimmick that just ran with it. So for me, I first saw it as the Braai Day washes over a deep celebration of heritage, but then at the same time I would say, okay, but what does that mean to me? Or why do I care? Because at the end of the day, that is probably the most routine practice in my life, throughout my life, is a braai. And at the same time, I was not a fan of the cultural appropriation approach to a celebration of heritage, with dressing in traditional closer beads or paint on my face or whatever. That just didn't sit well with me. So I think I just ended up wearing a black shirt and some pants. So I started to look at this Braai Day and really wanted to critique it and use it as a launching pad into questions about white identity in post-colonial South Africa and belonging. But like I said earlier, it was very much driven from a practice-based explorative space. It wasn't a theoretical investigation. It sort of led with practice at all points. And especially in the residency, I was given a very unique opportunity to just live and work practice for 6 weeks. So I didn't want it to be any ties to theory at first. I wanted the practice to lead the way. But in this looking for what represents me on Heritage Day, I struggle to find these sort of symbolic, these symbols of my culture, and then realized after many sunny, hot Heritage Day braai celebrations, I had been consistently wearing a very uniquely rich cultural symbol all along. And that was a rooinek, because I would burn the back of my neck every time at a braai. So for me, it became the space where I was starting to look at this word. This became the first work out of this body of work. I looked at this word. Obviously, rooinek means redneck, but not in the American sense, hopefully not. But it was what the Afrikaners would call the British soldiers back in the Boer War, because they weren't adapted to the sun, and would burn badly on the backs of their neck. But it became an interesting thing because for me, 100 years later, I'm still not adapted. I'm still getting sunburned. But at the same time, I wasn't a British person. I was an English-speaking South African. So it became more rooted to South Africa as opposed to anything else. It was an Afrikaans word about an English descendant of the English. So for me, it became a rich symbol, because I had the other dynamic was I'm English speaker with an Afrikaans surname. So there was always this battle of English Afrikaans. I didn't identify with Afrikaans culture, which obviously has strong symbols and attires and aesthetics that can be used for celebration of their culture, but that didn't sit with me either. In another work, so there were 4 works that I had created prior to this residency. That first one was one of them. The second one was this one, Construct, which was actually the first sort of 3D printed artwork of this body of work. So this is a 3D printed sculpture in 3D printed wood, which is a filament that's made up of 30% sawdust almost. So it's still mostly plastic, but it became a space of looking at identity and construction and building this fire, or this, using each piece speaks to an element of my identity or past, and contributes to the formation of myself. And also speaks to the fact that it's not a full portrait. So it's a part of me apart from you, as the title suggests. It's that connection, or that romantic dialogue with the country and myself and identity. You can see here in this image a closer look at those 3D print lines. In the GFI exhibition, I developed that into a miniature bronze cast as well. And then this was the other piece that I had created, also a 3D print in transparent filament. And this became the space where the wood had been burnt away. So I was the negative space. This artwork is titled Negative Space. So my identity, or my person is in between all these things as well, like a webbing, a netting. So it's just a complex look between 2 portraits at those elements. And then the last thing that I had created already was a video piece. So this is just stills from a video piece the video piece is titled From the Woods to the Soil, which is the exhibition title. And it's just a quiet looking at a braai being constructed, burnt down to ash, and then I physically massage that ash into the soil. The other element is From the Woods. So the title From the Woods is actually a play on my name, Van der Walt. Origin is translated as of the forest or from the woods. So it's looking at that lineage and then finding roots in the soil. And the other connection with the braai that I had developed was most of the braai wood we use is alien invasive species. So, you know, the rooikrans, black wattle, and these became sort of symbols or metaphors for this alien family tree that is foreign to the land but rooted in the soil. There's decades and centuries of adaptation and resistance and removal and conflict. So it had this very interesting depth to the symbol or to the metaphor. And then in a way, this video piece talks about, in a way, the act of braaiing. So this is now me not looking for the braai day root or gimmick, but looking at a more personal, rich view of the braai as a cultural process or ritual of self-discovery in a way. So by burning the wood, it becomes a shedding of these colonial ties or these ties to otherness, and finding something more fertile for the soil, which is ash, massaged in the soil. So that was the sort of thematic around that piece. But obviously, like I said, those were pieces I had made, but I hadn't shown. So they were just sitting. And that's the wonderful thing with this residency and maybe the difficult thing of being an artist or being in an expressive creative space is a part of me didn't think I would show that work in a way, because it felt so personal. And, you know, as artists, you're always applying for things and then getting rejected maybe here and there. And I started to think, is this really a body of work? You know, does it really say anything? Is it really going to work? And after I hadn't heard from them for that week of announcements, I thought to myself, no, maybe I must think of the next thing I want to do. And then getting a residencies really made me dive in and find a richness to it. So being in the context of William Humphreys as well, it's this vast collection of 16th century, 17th century still life and portrait painting. You know, every morning, I mean, every day I would be walking these halls. I was fascinated with all these realistic paintings. And one of the things I wanted to use the residency for is to, I have a love for painting and drawing, but I just hadn't had much time to work on it in the last couple of years. So I really wanted to dive into that. So I used that space to explore another body of work, which was the Distil Life, which I used it as a play on these pronk stilleven, which was the Dutch still life painting of the 17th century, where it's a showing off of your status, showing off of your wealth. In, you know, got these rare grapes from this area, this you know, it's bringing all these elements together to show a perfect you. It's in a way, it's like an Instagram filter of look how amazing I am. But I wanted to bring that to the thought of what South Africa is, well, what South Africa was in the 16th century, and the influence of the Dutch settlers and the conflicts on the coasts and you know, leading inland, and thought about this idea of these showing off and these status symbols in the still life, just in food, and adapted that to the braai culture, and replaced elements with what you would see at a braai, or showing off what I would see at a braai. To say, though, this is how I do it, but to distill in that way an essence of what I'm trying to find in the search for identity. And then further in the GFI exhibition, I created this one, which, yeah, just further continues with that idea. But one thing that did surprise me as well was in this process, in the way I was making, I kept on coming back to this sort of pre-colonial history as well, the sort of early human sense of home and belonging. So the cave paintings and things like that started to come out naturally in the work I was making. And obviously Africa being the cradle of humankind, and the origin of our species, there was a lot of thought about, you know, the braais, even though an Afrikaans word is not limited to just the white South African culture. It is throughout the world. Everyone does actually burn wood and cook meat on it, but we've developed another element of that culture on top of it. So I was very interested in and sort of let go with that on how it was interconnecting many cultures and histories, this act of braaiing. And I'll explain in the way I made these pieces a bit later as well, as to how the practice led me here. So this body, or this triptych, was called Indigenous Gaze, and I was looking at rock paintings of the past, specifically spurred on by two I was fascinated about that were in South Africa. But the idea of the Indigenous Gaze, I wanted to bring it not just from an African Indigenous or Southern African Indigenous gaze, but the fact to sort of show this narrative, because that's what rock art was used for, is to tell a story and a narrative. So this, in that way, I here drew the animals at Lascaux, France. I don't know if I've butchered that pronunciation, but to show a European, but not from a perspective of a white colonial European, but an early human European, who then is traveling by boat. So this is all actual referenced rock art. So this is a painting done in Portugal in Western Cape. So the ship comes in, and then these wagons were painted in Swartrugens in the Western Cape as well. So in that way, they tell this full story of the white settlement. This was another piece titled Explorations, as well, that plays on, and you can see elements in this piece of the braai grid. That so what I did, and you'll see later, I've actually braaied these pieces of paper, and then developed drawings on top of them. This one, Ghost Monument, referencing the Honored Dead Memorial in Kimberley. Another piece, and this one was the 3D printed one I did at the residency, called Sacrificial Lamb, which spoke to this white civilian population that was sent down to South Africa under false pretenses, you know, in the Eastern Cape, to be a civilian buffer in those wars, the frontier wars. And then at the same time, it speaks to, you know, the culture of, you know, the Karoo lamb, the merino Karoo lamb, which is our prized export, but at the same time shares a very similar history and narrative to what South Africans. It was brought, that breed of lamb was brought down from Europe in 1700s, late 1700s, and then spread across the country with the Voortrekkers. So it's very interesting that story that they both share. So you'll see I include elements of this braai culture in moments and in points. Another piece I found, as I walked in, I noticed it. So it was an Anton van Vaux. Struck me. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece of an unnamed Indigenous Sandman. but the title's called Dacha Smoker. And as soon as I arrived, I knew I wanted to interact with that piece. So at the end of the residency, I created this one, the fire starters, with a 3D printed sculpture that interacts with the Anton van Vaux. So for me, as many traditional sculptors in South Africa really looked up to the technical expertise of Anton van Vaux, but at the same time, there's a lot of issues with his work, readings into his work in a contemporary space because of his unnamed representation of the indigenous people, and obviously the context of him being a white European settling in South Africa, sort of using them as subjects. So I wanted to include myself in the work and not make it a distancing of the subject and observer, and include myself in that narrative. And then when it came to GFI, I wanted to bring a bit more local context to Gqeberha, Port Elizabeth. So I created this piece out of a large stack of 3D printed briarwood set in resin, and it references the Campanile here, which is a memorial to the 1820 settlers, and obviously here I've played on that word and called it a camperwal, the camperwal, and it speaks to camping and the transitory nature of white Africans, in that we've come from another land, and there's also that element of threatening to leave again if things get bad. So this idea of camping being a home, but not rooted into that place, and you'll be leaving soon. Here's also, sorry, I'm monitoring time, so I'm gonna keep on going. There was another self-portrait. This also speaks to that transitory nature, on the play on the word, or on that phrase, ons gaan nou braai, or nou gaan ons braai, which is, the exciting term of saying, okay, we're going to cook the meat now, we're going to get going, it's going to all happen. But it also, by burning away the braai, it just reads ons gaan nou, which then speaks to this idea of we're going to go. So the title, or hashtag I'm staying, was the movement of I'm staying, hashtag I'm staying because I love this country. It was a very, very trend at one point, but it also shows the privilege for some white African groups to be able to say, oh, well, I'll stay here until I don't like it, then I'll head off. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the how. So obviously there's a couple of approaches I took to this residency. I wanted to first, one element was using the briarwood and using the act of braaiing as an actual method of making, as a way of form making, but also mark making. So this was an element of form making in a similar way to what the Rooinek piece was, which, by the way, I don't know if you saw it. Yeah, the title of that was Heritage Day Under the African Sun. So this one was a reinventing the wheel, is what this series was about, and it spoke to, or it used the images of ship helms and wagon wheels with 3D printed elements added to it. So you can see here, I would dry out the wood, or the wood that I would put aside for making art, and some I'd have to put aside for cooking my meat. I had a lot of protein over those 7 weeks. And you can see there was other works I also used. I created parquet flooring with cut up briarwood, another colonial reference to what's beneath your feet. But interestingly enough, a lot of the parquet flooring in South Africa is obviously local Zimbabwean wood, so it's extracting wood from elsewhere and using it to create this feeling of Europe in African soil. So here you can see that process of braaiing the paper, which is, as you can see, it actually added elements of color, it added elements of tone with the resin that was coming out of the wood. I used blitz to add certain areas, burn things out. And there you can see the bri grid patterns at the base of exploration. And then some of the pieces, this one, I just hit around the bri and let it do elements of mark making and a bit of tongue in cheek. It's Port Jackson Pollock. Port Jackson obviously being an alien invasive briarwood or wood species. And then I also used the smoke of the briar to create tone that I could bring out portraits. This was how that self-portrait was created that I showed earlier. And then the other approach was just using it as a muse, using it as a inspiration to draw or paint. And these were acrylic painting, pastels, and some charcoal. And then the painting that I did tell you about, or I showed you earlier, the still life. It's another look at that approach to making within that space. And here you can see how that studio is not clean anymore. So I would say it's a very productive space. But the other way of making, and that's what I'm going to bring in with this image, is this guy. So that was the 3D printer that I brought along, or I had sent up to Kimberley. And it allowed, obviously it didn't make everything from scratch, but the process of 3D printing allowed me to paint. It allowed me to draw, because while I was doing those things, a sculpture was being made. So that, in a way, is what now talks to this future way of making, or this, well, it's actually a contemporary way of making, but the potential of that space for an artist. It is there, churning and churning 8 hours a day in creating these forms, releasing time for me to make other things. So it became my assistant on the residency, or the apprentice and the master artist relationship in a way. And it was a simple entry level of it's about $3,000 3D printer that I made quite a few sculptural pieces with. But it also involved, or it required me to be prepared. So in order to print, you need a 3D model. You can't just ask it to print what you want. You need to make it. So it's a lot of time management for myself in that process at the residency. But I did have a catalog, a database that I had already from a year back. So this is me working with an engineering company to scan alien invasive briarwood, asking them to use their 2 million rand engineering scanner to do some silly things for me. You can see there's the briarlid. Also had some scans of myself, or my face more, and then I had to remodel. You can see on the right there how a lot had to be constructed around the scan. And then you'll see what that Google Drive looked for me, or how it looks. I have this access to this resource at any point, in any space, any location. Yeah, I had the engineers scan some actual force and lamb chops, but I've got in my Google Drive all these folders with scans ready to go, and that's what was so beneficial when I was at the residency, is that I could pull from this resource with the printer there, add it to new sculptures, adapt it, create sculptures from scratch. You can see here some of the database that I was working with, setting up for the printer. That's why they're in those collections, because that's the print bed. It can only fit in that space. And you can see there that I also had to break the figure up into pieces like a toy and assemble it like toy manufacturing, to get the best out of the form. But also because my printer could only print 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters, it needed to be created in a way that allowed me to make it bigger than what the print bed was. Also, sculptures would have been very small, and that's not what I wanted. Especially this piece, the fire starters, that was working directly with Anton van Vo's piece. So I had, and this is part of that research I do into the entrepreneurial benefits of 3D sculpting, is it's parametric by nature. It works on parameters, dimensions, specifics. So even in the space, I was able to walk out of my studio, go to Anton van Vo's piece, measure it, go, okay, that's what the ideal size should be, translate that back into the digital space, and then print. Its benefit is ultimately in prototyping. Rapid prototyping is 3D printing's major benefit, in that you can print at a low cost, tweak it, see if it works as a product, as an artwork in this case, see, okay, wait, no, it actually needs to be a little bit thinner here, and you go back and forth, and then you're prototyping at a low cost. And then once you're happy with that product, you go ahead and make your main product. So from that space, once I had those 3D models, I would prepare them. On the left, you see a 3D printing slicing software, which it cuts the model into thousands of slices to tell it what layer it needs to make. It's a very simple machine, a 3D printer. It's like a fancy glue gun in a way. It's just got a hot end and it pushes plastic through, and then it gets told what coordinates, and then it goes up a level and another set of coordinates. So after a couple of weeks, I had quite a lot of 3D prints waiting to be implemented into different artworks. Obviously, certain things were made from scratch. So these chess pieces and the brass salt at the back there, all created from scratch. The full figure was created from scratch with the clothing, the hat, and all. It was just the face that was scanned. And then once I had printed all the pieces, I'd making sure that they're all ready to go, and I would start assembling and creating myself as a self-portrait in that space, looking like a metal cast next to Anton van Vo. And a large part of the process of 3D printing as a benefit is a lot of the comments against it as an approach is that it is distant. It's not, you're not engaging with the work. And then this approach sort of contests that. You're very much engaged with the work, but at the same time, I advocate in a lot of my research that the digital space becomes another workspace that feels like a material, because if you don't know how to use a tool, it might not be the best thing for you to use. In the same way, it could be dangerous for you to use a tool you don't know. So in the computer space, if you don't know a tool, you can't really speak and say it's not a material, because your mind starts to work differently when it comes to 3D printing, because you go from digital to physical to digital to physical with all the prototyping that while making digitally, I'm very much aware of the feel of what I'm pushing on with a mouse or a pen tablet. And its resistance is something that I feel inside. So it's a weird space, making in the digital space, but it's hugely beneficial because it allows you to visualize. So visualize before it's being made. It allows you to prototype, and it is cost effective. That printer, these sculptures probably, well, I probably shouldn't say this, but in raw material, it's probably about 80 Rand to just over 100 Rands worth of plastic. Obviously, there are other factors that make it more costly. The machine runs for probably a week to print one of these figures. So those elements, but for a South African context and for South African creatives, this sort of demystifying digital being inaccessible in this regard. Obviously, there are other fundamental issues that create a digital divide. But there are so many avenues within that space. In the same way, for example, other disciplines in art, sculpture, printmaking, fashion, all require certain machinery that is inaccessible once you leave or once you graduate. So to equate it to other disciplines, yes, there are very expensive softwares, very expensive computers, and very expensive printers, but there are also cheap alternatives, open source softwares, free to download softwares, and cheap 3D printers. So in that dynamic, this way of application, this way of making, is very much real to now, and not a practice for the future. It's something implemented now quite effectively, and I believe even more so in South Africa. So thank you.
Great, Jonathan. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I can see all these claps going up the screen. That's great. Let me see if I can turn myself on there. Okay, great. So yeah, I see everybody's turning their videos on. I'm sure everyone is very eager to start engaging with you. But I'm going to snatch my first opportunity as your host and say, yeah, first of all, thank you very much. It was fascinating. Could have listened to you all day and watch you all day. And one of the things that I was thinking about as far as future goes, I mean, there are lots of things that I want to talk about, but just this one thing which I think is fascinating, that thing you said about at the end about this shifting mindsets from digital to physical to digital to physical. I mean, I looked at all your representations of that digital stuff, and I just thought, oh my goodness, my mind is going to blow. I could never do that kind of stuff. But if you could train yourself to be able to make that shift backwards and forwards, that I think would be a training in complexity that would actually be extremely valuable and useful for future beings, to be able to make your mind flexible enough to negotiate these very, very different spaces and bring them together. So I think you have a lot implicitly to say about how art can help shape a future kind of mind. And that was one of the things that really struck me first about your practice.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and I think, I don't know, as a sculptor myself, I was fascinated with traditional sculpture and traditional painting growing up, but I had a parallel side of me that was very fascinated with computers, and I resisted for so long as a practitioner to bring them together, because I saw in my mind, I falsely saw certain aspects of digital as maybe a cheating route or an easy route in certain ways, in how you can, for example, you can say Control Z and you can undo the mistake or you made on your digital sculpt, and you can quickly undo it and try again. And I know someone, I think it was Malcolm McCullough, wrote about, he speaks about digital craft, and he brought up the idea of, okay, well, perhaps in a new way of thinking of making, the ability to undo something you've done also adds a complexity to allow you to do more things with a greater risk, to sort of push that practical boundary. So in that way, I've started to find these benefits in making that have allowed me to push my practice.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So if anyone would like to chat, I'm afraid I can't really see my screen properly, so maybe either just stick your hand up. Sarah, there you are. Right. You'll have to unmute yourself.
There we go.
Good.
Hi there. Thanks so much, Jonathan. That was a really, really interesting presentation. I loved seeing your personal development with your sculptures and also seeing the technical side of things. So I actually have two questions for you, but I'll make it brief. So as an arts educator in the, well, I'm speaking now, I'm an arts educator in the secondary and tertiary space. And I would love to pass on something that I've learned today to my students. You mentioned that there are open source softwares and more accessible ways to start this journey into the 3D sculpting space. Is there a software that you'd recommend, or are there maybe online courses or something that you'd recommend that I could share with my students?
Yes, definitely. Thank you for that. Blender is the biggest and most comprehensive free to download software for 3D modeling. Is one I also use. I do use one that I paid for as well. So a lot of the videos you saw were a software that I did purchase, which is ZBrush. But Blender, I would suggest definitely. It's something I feel every young creative should put time aside to learn, because it has a wide scope of building knowledge in 3D animation, in rendering, and what's wonderful about the 3D digital space is it's a mirror of our reality. So it has digital cameras to take digital recordings of animations, for example, or to take digital photos is what the render is in the digital space. So you can be a traditional photographer with your knowledge of cameras and lenses and scopes and shutter speed and all that stuff. And that is the same terminology and the same description in the digital space. And those understandings and that knowledge translates into a digital workspace as well. So yes, it is daunting. And as Andrea said, when you see something, but you're also seeing it in the middle of it. You're seeing it in the middle of the chaos. You're seeing it with maybe years of experience in that space. So entering into those softwares as a beginner with it, and you can get tutorials on YouTube for free. So the training academy for all this stuff can be done free with the free software. Obviously, you need a computer. That is the main thing.
Okay, great. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I'm afraid I can't see. Okay, well, okay, there we go. There, Jessica.
Thank you, Andrea. Jono, fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed that, and I have to admit here in front of everyone, I sadly missed your walkabout last year, so I'm so grateful I've had this opportunity now to at least hear some of your thoughts behind the making of the work. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much, Jess. I appreciate that.
My question for you, Jono, and I hope I'm going to phrase this in a sensible way. So earlier on, you spoke about the resilience of the medium in the same way that you experienced that with other sculptural media. And I think for myself as an artist, and this is probably true for many artists or creatives, is that if you spend enough time with the medium, you kind of feel like you get inside it. And the knowledge that you have of that process is not only cerebral and decision-based, but it kind of lives in your body, where decisions are made very intuitively through, the body and the physicality of that relationship between yourself and the material. So do you find you still kind of get that that pushback and that embedded knowledge through this digital 3D printing form in the same way that you get that through working with sculptural wax and clay and so forth? Or is it not so much that you're necessarily getting it just through the 3D printing component, but the fact that once it's printed, you still have to sand it down and work it in the same way you would work other sculptural materials, if that makes sense?
No, it's a great question. Thank you. I feel like I do. I feel like it's maybe a different energy around it, or a different sort of embodied experience being through a workspace through a screen. But obviously there are various things that can help that. So you get, I have a tablet as well with a pen, and then that, for example, that pen, as you push, is pressure sensitive and scratches into the form. So in those ways, you can get a real sense of that feeling of the work itself. The software is also dependent on it. You get a lot of softwares that are obviously very parametric and very almost looks like architectural blueprints. You know, it's a complex viewport, but then you get softwares like the one I use, ZBrush, which is made for sculptors. So it uses lighting and real-time like rendering of objects that make it look like clay. So even though you might swipe one stroke in the wrong way and it flattens the whole form without sort of a sense of substance, once you know how to work it, it does have that feel. And like I mentioned, the sort of back and forth and the back and forth, for me, it gets to a point now where you work on a sculpture, but it isn't quite a sculpture yet. You're working on it, it's complete in its digital space, but then as soon as you print it, you get to feel its forms, which is it's just a very like a romantic way of describing that process. But as a sculptor, when you're handling a work while working on it, you from the get-go are understanding its surface and its form. But in the digital space, you do lack the full handling of the form. You can feel it as you work on it that the form is getting made, and you can visualize it, but you can't hold it. So only once it does get printed do you get that sort of feeling of, oh wait, here that form feels incredible, or something like that. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does, and I think even beyond just the object itself, you know, your work doesn't end with the realization of the 3D printed object. There's still the matter of the other elements that go into creating the fine art sculpture, you know, whether it's resting on a wooden plinth that you yourself have, you know, created from scratch, or positioning it in relation with an existing work, you know, so that there's a very important curatorial element to create a dialogue between other works. I think therein there's also it makes it more than just a tool or a means to an end to create something. It becomes a work of art in that sense.
Okay,
thank you, Jess. Yes.
Yes, Brian has his hand up.
Yeah, it was a fantastic presentation. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to build on
very much.
saying Jessica's and Jonathan is I just had the good fortune to go to the Rodin Museum in Paris, and
Yes.
I was amazed at the number of. I was absolutely blown away. One of the things I always find fascinating is to see an artist buy a book and then to actually see an artist's studio and see the work. Same thing. I got to see Iscia in Den Haag. The same thing, like all this work that they do that you never see.
Yeah.
Right, because a book has to pick their 15 best, or even if it's a history of art, they pick their one best, right? So what I really enjoyed, I agree with what others have said, Jessica said, is watching the process, which Andrea, I think you started the discussion off of. And when I was at the Rodin Museum, I was blown away by how many small things he had everywhere. And he was using everything, paper, obviously clay, but just wood, everything and anything. And then to see it, you know, become these bronze, you know, the things we know about him. The same with Escher. So I like your pushback. We had a bit of, Andrea and I had a bit of chat of this when I was down in South Africa. Is I think all this AI stuff and the new printing and all this stuff, they're just tools. I think people have just lost their minds, you know, about, because they think they're going to take over the world. But the reality is they're just tools, and they're part of the creative process. And I like what you were saying, Jessica, around, like, you know, I've worked back in the day when you only had printed photographs, the Stone Ages, you know, I would slice them and cut them to make these montages. But then when I went over to digital, I was able to do things I could not do So I also saw a lot of things that you were doing as an artist that you could not have done. So I don't see it as cheating. I just see it as opening up new opportunities, new avenues. So I was just wondering your response to that.
Well, thank you. Yes. Yeah, it's interesting that you brought Rodin into that, because he's one of those pivotal figures in the history of sculpture that welcomed the technological advancements, whereas a lot of other artists were resisting that, and he blatantly said, I've got a foundry, I've got a studio of guys who are going to turn my plasters into or turn my clays into plaster, or my small scale into large scale, and then using all those scaling up tools. And the interesting thing now is the bronze, sort of the craft of bronze casting is a traditional, very ancient craft, but it's been the most adaptable to new technologies than art itself, in a way, which is also part of my interest, is that space of the craftspeople, or the apprentices, or those that are working in foundries and fabrication spaces, are excited to bring on any, or are in the space of technological advancement. They're in the space of new tools, new advancements in their space, and they're not worried necessarily about what it means or the full scope of its theory or how it impacts the society. So they already, I mean, bronze brought 3D CNC milling and upscaling with 3D scanning from like 20 years ago already. But you'd have to be an artist to go to a foundry to know they could do that, or they would they wouldn't need to waste their hours of labor in translating something bit by bit with measurements and scale tools. They can scan it and blow it up and print it. So there's that aspect that drives the implementation of those tools as well, that I find very, very fascinating.
I'm starting to get edgy about time. We're starting to get over, and I see these hands floating along. Brian, is yours a response hand?
Yeah, just real quick. Yeah, because so I live in York in the north of England, and we've got the cathedral here, and they're always out there. They got the stonemasons out there, and they do. I always chat with them because I'm, when do you decide to just do this versus when do you have a computer render it? And it's not everything's stone that they put back up in there. And so I'm gonna go now with all these new ideas. I'm like, hey, I just saw a brilliant presentation in South Africa. You guys are cheating.
Thanks, Brian. Jessica, is it a new hand, old hand?
It's a new hand. Very quickly, if I may.
Okay.
Thank you. So Jono, I think maybe also speaking from the education space for yourself and like Sarah, do you think that you are able to make a more sort of informed decision, and you're able to appreciate these new exciting developments and the nuances of a new medium because of the fact that you've got a very technical, traditional sculptural training background? So compare that with someone coming in who's only just doing the digital training. That you probably can't compare. I think it would be too different. But I feel like there's so much more depth, and there's a really there's a profundity in what you're doing because you've got that context. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, thank you. That is, I mean, it's also an interesting internal battle I have in that space, because there's the elements to me that know I'm working in the softwares and the world of things that could go so far beyond coming back to the physical. So there's aspects to when I'm making that I feel like am I pulling back again, or am I getting too rooted to bring it all the way back to a traditional sculptural representation where it could be an animation or VR or an XR or an experience? Can it be that, so that the benefit of that in education is that if a student coming in knows that, or knows that world and its possibilities, then they can have 4 different roads to follow. So they could then come back and make it real through 3D printing, or they could then do further adjustments and take it to an animation, or they could render it and do architectural drawings. So like in that way, I think it is such a valuable skill for creatives, just to be aware of, just to know, because I mean, part of that other research with regards to entrepreneurship is the fact that a large portion of the costs in big projects, for example, go to the 3D renderings of these things, or to the 3D draft drawings of getting things cut in metal, for example. So if you need to get certain things cut out of sheet steel, they need a vector drawing. So a lot of the time you'd have to then have a middleman or someone in between who would then do that at a high cost, pushing your cost up. Whereas now you can propose things, do the middleman job as well, and that all comes back to you as the artist. And I think it's just that fear of that digital line that can open up these, well, once going through that, can open up so much more.
Okay, Alex, sorry, we are way over time. There are going to be 100 questions. We could spend here all day. So I'm going to have to, end us. And I'm going to be completely wicked, because I'm going to end this with a curved ball that I'm going to just throw at Jonathan. It's a philosophical curved ball. And that is this curiosity about the hybridity and adaptability and flexibility that you're insisting on in the practice, and then this very interesting kind of fairly traditional understanding of identity that's tied to land. And I'm finding that curious, because I have a feeling that in the future we're going to be evicted from our land as a mass, and we might not be able to tie our identity to land. So it's just something I want you to think about. But I mean, that is it. And I'm sorry, Alex, for jumping in there and quietening you, but yeah, otherwise we are going to go on forever. And Jonathan, thank you so much. That was really fascinating, and as you can see, everybody wants to chat to you. So we'll have to do it again sometime in the future. But thanks so much,
Thank you
everyone.
so much.
And yeah, have a great weekend. Okay, bye.
Thank you very much, everyone.